Brady's Choice by Anne Brooke, narrated by Keaton Hartigan. The last time I saw Mr. Philip Matthew Keyes O'Connell, I slapped him across the jaw with the back of my hand and called him a fucking bastard before walking out of his flat and our so-called relationship. He made no effort to chase me, so I just kept walking, away from my home, my town, and my whole ruddy life. Which made it something of an embarrassment to be facing him now, 5 years on, in an interview room the size of a postage stamp and absolutely desperate for the job he might be offering me. Fate was a bloody thing sometimes, but that didn't mean I had to like it. So I kept my best professional smile beaming brightly at the right moments and tried not to think about the new way he'd styled his hair and his surprisingly distinguished beard. So, Mr. Treherne, can you tell us about what you might offer in this role that our other candidates won't? The interview is coming to a natural end now, and this must be the last question on their lists. When I'd walked in about an hour ago, I hadn't expected to see Philip. Hell, I didn't even realize he had anything at all to do with the Surrey Design Consultancy, and I nearly walked out again. I wasn't the only one affected either. His face had turned pale behind the dark beard, and his fingers had, for a moment or two, gripped the table edge. By the time we were formally introduced, however, his handshake was as steady as stone. Mine, I had to admit, was less so. It turns out my confusion was justified. Philip hadn't intended to be one of the interviewers, and in fact, didn't even work for the company. He was here in a business capacity for one of the sponsorship companies who part-owned the project and had only been called in as a replacement at the last minute, since his colleague had found a job elsewhere. It looked like, if I still wanted the post, I'd be working at least some of the time with him. That couldn't help but change everything. Right now I tried to focus on the question. I think I bring freshness, I said. I retrained professionally in pottery and pottery design about 5 years ago, and some of my commissions since have become quite well known. But you've got my references. I don't need to repeat them for you. I found my niche later in life than most. That means I can bring steadiness and understanding of the business side to the role, and with the perhaps limited budget this project might have, that may well come in useful. I'm not a prima donna. I cut my designs to the needs of the money available, and I don't whine. Philip said nothing to this, but one of the other interviewers, an elderly woman called Janet, laughed and wrote something on her notepad. When my ex-lover finally spoke, it was to dismiss me. Thank you for that, Mr. Treherne. If you have no more questions, then I think we're done. Your time here is appreciated. When we made our decision, we'll let you know. Another brief shake of the hand with the interviewing panel, and then a couple of minutes after that I was outside, leaning against the wall opposite their offices and taking great gulps of air. If anyone had looked out the window, I must have seen the least helpful candidate of them all, but I couldn't help myself. The delayed shock of seeing Philip was making my legs tremble, and I swore I could still feel the warmth of his skin against my palm when our hands had touched. I simply needed a few minutes before returning to my car and driving home, a good 20 miles away. What was I worried about anyway? It was obvious this was one job I'd never get, not in 1,000 years. No matter how well suited I was. I'd better get going, strike it off the list, and send my CV to a few more hopeful-looking places. That would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, being the sort of obsessive bloke who didn't ever know what was good for him, I drove home, poured myself a large glass of red, sat in the living room, and remembered how things had been with Philip and me. I thought we'd been in love. Stupid now to think of it. I'd met him over 10 years ago, when I was 26 and trying to pursue a career in finance, whilst getting increasingly sidetracked by my hobby of pot making. God knows why I'd ever imagined I could make a go of anything to do with mathematics, but my father had been keen. And after all, it was where I'd met Philip. He'd taken my breath away at first sight, and I wasn't being a cliché, as I'd really felt it hard to breathe for a few moments. It hadn't been love, not then. Just something else that felt almost physical, but wasn't only lust. He'd been standing at the door of the meeting room I was heading towards. A dark-haired, rugged man with the bluest eyes I'd ever seen. Such a contrast from my own fair hair and rather too willowy physique. Opposites, I suppose. And even then I should have been warned. He was there representing one of our clients, and I couldn't stop glancing at him, which made focusing on the presentation I was giving an uphill task. Once I looked across at him, while I was in the middle of pointing out sales trends for his aeronautical consultancy, and he smiled right at me. I think I stammered my way to the end of my moment in the spotlight after that, and, as I sat back down, he winked at me. When we left the meeting, he caught up with me and asked me out, then and there, breaking at least a dozen professional rules in the process.